Okay. Uh, Welcome everyone to the AI, well, colloquially the AI ethics session, but we'll more or less focus on a lot of aspects. We'll start off by introducing the plan for the lecture as I had it was we'll start off by introducing um, the major problems, as in like the major questions which arise within the field of AI ethics, beginning with, of course, the alignment problem and artificial general intelligence. Then we'll also consider some info about biases, which will be more like the feedback you get from that would be better implemented in your code. So that would be a more practical aspect. Then, other than that, we will also discuss language, like specifically the parts of language and in the sense of exclusion, how language with coupled with how LLMs work could end up excluding some people and how you could try and avoid that as well. Some policy you could send questions in the chat like at any time, and I'll check and get back to you. So that's perfectly fine. I'll check up chat every couple of minutes. So then we'll cover the black box problem and some background info, stuff that goes on in the background, and we often do not realize stuff as in the workers that are engaged in very menial, underpaid labor to get keep the autonomous AI models working that we use. And we often do not think about them, nor do we think about the websites or the data reserves from which these AI labs scrape their data without proper consent or permission. So that is also a concern. And then finally, we'll move on to the major topic, which is AI generated content when put to suppose social media or whatever. And if it influences certain action, and it is suppose misguidance or misinformation is being spread because of AI generated content, which may even be hyper realistic at this point, then who is to be held responsible for that? The data that the LLM is trained on, the person who created the LLM, or the team who created the LLM, or the person who posted it, and questions like that. So yeah, that's like the plan for this lecture. And I'll just begin by like a short introduction. I'm also the executive hackathon director for this year. And yeah, other than computational linguistics and CS, uh, I'm especially interested in philosophy and even physics for that matter. But for this part, we'll talk about why I am interested in philosophy and why I think it's a subject worth pursuing just a little bit in the beginning. So I was like formally introduced to philosophy, the tools of philosophy, no more than 2 years ago. Um, but I've found that I've been asking and wondering about and debating about these very questions that are interest to philosophers for as long as I can actually remember, right? So 2 years ago, for like the last 2 years, I represented my country, India, twice at the International Philosophy Olympiad, which is where I met lots of cool people, enjoyed like insightful conversations, and which is that's also how I got introduced to LingHacks since I met a previous organizer there. So yeah, that was a good networking experience. But then it also made me realize that perhaps a lot of you as well are have been expected to be like STEM kids who do not really, who just by the virtue of their being are expected to not value what is considered the humanities as much. At least that's what happened in my culture. We were sort of brought up with the mindset that okay, medicine and other like fields like that are very respectable, whereas philosophy is just idle thinking. But especially the concept that we are discussing about like today, like AI and the emerging technology, which even the engineers do not have a clear idea about. This is where philosophers sort of get to shine, and they have their views are way more important here. So I think that sort of gets proved wrong here, and yeah, that's also why it's worth considering. Okay, so a major influence of philosophy on me has also been that like I've become more accepting of solutions which different fields of subjects offer, but what may just be considered like problems of the hard sciences. Even AI could be considered a problem if you really want to of just computer science, like pushing the limits of what can be made at its very edge, right? But you might find it valuable to consider inputs from cognitive science, neuroscience, even sociology into how AI should work. Uh, yeah, because it has great potential to impact us and our lives, all of our lives. So it's better if you have a lot. more perspective from the fields which are considered humanities as well. So another example, not just the AI one, is that anthropology and sociology, from what I've found, offer like great insights into, say, if you were to study epidemiology, but over time, like if you were to study schizophrenia prevalence over time, anthropology offers a great deal of info on that. And even I read a paper recently by Robert Sapolsky on the same matter. So yeah, that's that. Okay, so yeah, philosophy and sciences. For researchers, the point of all of this, like the debate and the conversation we are having around ethics and philosophy, is that especially for the scientists and the researchers, philosophy helps clarify their definitions, right? So if imagine a neuroscientist, a psychologist, and a cognitive scientist were all to get into the same room and they were to work on something interdisciplinary, but then they turn into like then they have some problems, right? So if someone were to talk about qualia or consciousness or what it means to like just being, all the three fields have different interpretations of what that exactly entails, what it means, because of their century or millennia long fields, like the history of and the connotations of behind those words in the respective fields. A neuroscientist may view the concept of a mind very crudely and very differently than how a psychologist would. So that's where philosophers come in and clarify the definitions. But that's not what's important for us here. For developers, when they're suppose making AI as an example, philosophy will help them like gain perspective on the ethical implications of what they're building. And then the ethical aspect is no more like something that is considered afterwards, after something happens, we'll look at it afterwards. But no, yeah, this aspect is what we'll focus on today. And it's something like suppose if you consider the ethical implications beforehand, you're more prepared for what happens, right? Okay. This final part of why philosophy matters is just why should you even think about that, right? What kind of questions do they raise? So it's more about suppose if AI really does get way better, if we actually achieve artificial general intelligence, who does the additional performance benefit to? And getting this greater scale comes at which cost? The cost of those unpaid labor. That is something we talked about. Also, taking data without permission from data centers, not data centers, but more like websites which have built them, blogs or online forums without their permission. If you're scraping their data, is that a valid cost to have, right? And yeah, and also if you're trying to quantify consciousness in the context of AI or AGI for that matter, then how accurate are your definitions for those conscious, like uh, the barriers that you've set? How accurate are they? That's something useful as well. And yeah, why philosophers' opinion matters is that they've spent a lot of time like clarifying the incentives, costs, and definitions for a lot of questions over a bunch of years. So yeah, they'd be great here, and they'll help us warn about misalignment and how, but also how if you were to imagine actual alignment to human values for the AGI that is to come, what makes it meaningful, just, and also humane in some sense. That's also a consideration. Okay, so other than this like long talk, now we have like a short video. Wait, what? It just started playing. Uh, can you hear the audio? I'm not sure. There's this quick video, which sort of introduces. I made this like a year ago, which introduces almost all the problems you might generally find associated with AGI. Let's just text me if you can't hear it, okay? I'll play it and just text me if you can't hear it. Are you sure you can't see it? Someone can speak up as well if you just like to clarify. Oh, you can't hear? Just a second. I'll just reshare in a bit. Just a quick reshare. Okay. Yep. Share sound should work now. Just a quick video. It just like gives you an overview of all the problems there are. It's very crude, so just don't judge it. And yeah, just look to it. Wait, sorry. Yep. It's just glitching. that's the video. Uh, the good part about this video is the headlines that come up at the very end. Uh, I did not make this for the lecture. I made it for some other competition a while back, but I found that it was very relevant here, so I just used it. But if you look through the headlines, especially the blue one would be the central theme for this specific lecture. But if you look at the other sections as well, Microsoft lays off entire AI ethics team, which shows like even though the problems are very much there, they're just not as well recognized. So that's also a problem. And some labs do a very good job of realizing these problems. Even in the introduction ceremony yesterday, we talked about Anthropic. And I really commend Anthropic for they do great work on constitutional AI and AI alignment, as opposed to perhaps the other AI labs, you could say so. Yeah, and this is the black box problem, which I'll also discuss. Even the scientists who build AI can't actually tell you how it works because of course, you all know the basics of how there's such great depth of neural networks and processing involved that you can't, for a specific output, tell why that output came out to be as it did, right? So yeah, that's the point. Yeah, okay, that's the video. We're moving forward. Okay, this is the first problem. We'll sort of go over the other ones and focus a lot more on the final problem which we have, which I think is sort of less covered in most talks about this. Okay, so first thing, so artificial general intelligence, of course, as you know, the intelligence that we have right now, the AI we have, is sort of far away from the dreams or horrors of artificial intelligence, however you would like to call it. What we have right now is an AI which can solve academic problems. You can ask it to do like calculations, that kind of stuff, even be creative to some extent, so that kind of stuff. But artificial general intelligence is a whole another thing. It's an AI which is, you could say, more or less actually conscious and actually understanding would be the vision to visualize AGI. And alignment becomes a huge problem when talking in terms of AGI. Right now, perhaps it's not that big of a concern. There are much bigger concerns at play, such as like the carbon footprint of running these models. But if as we are approaching AGI, alignment becomes a really important problem to solve. So alignment in this context means to like say align to what basically, to what values and to whose values. So even philosophers have debated the nature of morality, personhood, harm, and that kind of stuff for so long. Now engineers have to do the same, developers have to do the same. Without ethical like reflection from the start, we sort of have a risk of leading on to and creating entities. Yeah, we're calling AGI entities because perhaps they would actually be conscious and we would have to reconsider where we place them on the personhood scale, right? You could also like there are, as you might have heard, there are debates for veganism, of course, but there are debates as to uh, having giving multi-species democracy is the word, like giving animals a say in the democratic system is a thing that has been considered for so long in mostly the leftist centers. But yeah, it is a consideration, as in maybe when you're even in slaughterhouses, perhaps the environment should be better. Maybe they should be able to like roam around and stuff. That those kind of stuff, right? So here, if AI is actually conscious and if it actually can understand stuff, then we may want to reconsider where we place it on the personhood scale. Then maybe it would be then maybe you'd have to consider how the AI feels as something that you build your actions around. But yeah, so we risk creating entities that are intelligent, even efficient, and then they would be completely misaligned with human values and human well-being if we do not actually solve the alignment problem. Because there, we do not have a common history with, of course, the minds of the AGI. The way we think, the way our minds have grown up to be, is very different from theirs. We've coded theirs, right? And they've also coded their own minds in some sense. So we do not want to risk being misaligned. We do not want them to be misaligned with human values. And what are human values is also a very good philosophical question, one that we'll probably not answer, but something you can think about and something you can research about as well. So yeah, and we've already seen this problem play out with the narrow AI systems that we have right now. That is the problem of social biases. And the problem we'll discuss right after the next slide. But AGI has the potential to like scale up these failures of social biases to a huge extent and maybe even cause greater harm. So that's a concern. Yeah. So yeah, coming to the biases point that I just raised, uh, there is of course no such thing as a truly unbiased machine. Why that is so might be clear to some of you, but we'll just go through it over. We'll go over it. So though computational linguistics and NLP have like a huge capacity for extreme progress in our world, it has a fair share of issues that need to be addressed, right? And these issues go from, of course, starting with the biases thing. So there is no such thing as a truly unbiased machine because all machines have been, the ones we're talking about at least, have been fed some data by some human or have been modified by humans. They AI models they work in such a way as to they only amplify and multiply human biases and human ways of thinking. So though a majority of the time we don't realize it, humans show bias in nearly every of the data we produce, every action we take. And okay, so there's a good example. Consider, for example, a data set, right, which shows traits of employees at certain companies and technology and computing industries. Yeah. If we use a data set like this to filter to potential job applicants, and if you're asking the AI to review resumes for you, it would choose prominent trait over others. So the issue with the data set, though, is that the human bias shows itself in every hiring decision. Since humans have done it for so long, historically speaking, now the technology industry is mostly composed with white young men. The problem is that the AI doesn't really know, is it composed that way because they're the most qualified, or is it just because lots of years of uh, historical biases which will propagate again and again, right? Uh, yeah. So the same thing happened like 7 years ago at Amazon. It's a very well recorded story. So the tech space has always, as I said, been historically dominated by young white men, an obvious trait that would show itself in the data. But this means that more likely than not, the data set would filter out potential candidates that were that were persons of color and that weren't white young men, right? Even women as well. So that would further escalate the issue and further enhance and amplify the bias that has been there just because it has been there for so long, right? So in fact, this scenario happened at Amazon, as we just discussed. And yeah, so this is an example of the three major biases, which we'll quickly go over. The first is the historical bias, as we just discussed, when past inequalities shape current data. We've explained this well enough, so we'll just move on to the next one. Yeah, in NLP specifically, which is the theme of the hackathon, how historical biases show is that, suppose in the context of NLP, something like this may show by if you have a list of words being commonly associated with men or women in its analysis. I'll take the example of, say, a football player, right? And if you were to use perhaps search results or even a predictive autocomplete, you're more likely, if you look up for a football player, uh, to get results associated with men rather than women if you're just using NLP, which has been trained off lots of data sets, just because of, okay, well, men have been there in football for so long and just overrepresented generally. So, yeah, these biases will just continue to stay, and perhaps even when we are unaware of them, they're fed into our data and they work through our data. So, yeah. Okay, so then we have the representation bias. When certain voices are systematically over or underrepresented, right? So it shows itself in data set where there is over or underrepresentation of specific groups. The demographic data of small town in, say, uh, small town in India compared to like a huge city in China or the US is likely to be extremely dissimilar from one another, even if the sample size of the data is same, right? So this shows itself in NLP with the data that is likely going to use to train, right? So much the data that is easy to obtain will be Creative Common books. So stuff that is easily available online. We're not talking about data scraping right now. Suppose there's a Gutenberg e-library online. There are also some resources which keep a log of lots of books and stuff online for free. That's the data which, if you're training a new LLM model for yourself, that's the data which which you will use at the very beginning to train your data set. And in this data, of course, these books were exclusively written more or less by white men and women. Since they've been these were mostly published a while back, and yeah, so that's a overrepresentation of a certain, not, well, let's not say minority, but yeah, but it's an overrepresentation of a certain group of people, and this lacks diverse authorship. So yeah, that's what the representation bias looks like. Then there's finally the measurement bias. This is something which can be, you can combat it more easily when you're coding, right? So when inconsistent data, measurement bias is harder to point out at times. However, it essentially boils down to when data is like collected incorrectly or labeled inconsistently across your different data sets which you're employing, right? Which leads to incorrect outcomes and even oversimplifications in some cases. So in the specific context of NLP, measurement bias is non-standardization within data sets. Of course, just as I said, incorrect or inconsistent labeling within data sets. And yeah, this may seem like a not so important issue, but it is extremely important to have as much consistency across the data sets you're using to avoid tipping the scale in certain direction, and which have potential to lead to more prejudice and bias within the machine learning model, right? Yeah. So there's this final issue within the biases thing, which is even more philosophical issue than the others. It is the issue with what we want. Suppose, let's just say, the internet to present to us. Do we want us to present information as accurately as possible, or do we want it to show us information as in how we want it to be, how we want our society to be like? Um, how how this makes sense is that if you were to look up something, uh, yeah, if you were to look up, suppose, CEOs of tech companies, what do you want the images result to look like? Do you want it to actually reflect how the demographics of the current CEOs in tech, or do you want it to represent how society should be? The people of color are also, this should also be there. Women need to be there just as much, right? Or do you want it to just show you what actually is? Because what is the case is sometimes sort of pretty different from what we want it to be, right? So yeah, that's the decision the developer has to make when they hard code their AI. And this is also something that you should realize. There are lots of implicit decisions which are involved while you code your program, while you train your data set, more important, right? While you train your model, more importantly. So yeah, these are the kinds of questions you need to ask yourself to have a more unbiased I would say, unbiased model. Okay, and some more. The next, this is done. Okay, so yeah, this is something we covered in the introduction ceremony, like very briefly. Yeah, this is the quote I had up in the introduction ceremony. I'll just quickly go over it because it's not that much relevant. It's not a problem we can solve that well either. But the quote goes like, discourse is not simply that which translates struggles or systems of domination, but it is the thing for which and by which there is struggle. So what it basically is trying to say is that discourse structures or discourse in itself here is talking about just language and all the talk that goes around, all the debate that keeps on happening. How the debate that keeps on happening shapes what can be thought or said uh, in continuation, right? And language is shown as a site of struggle and not just communication. So language is here sure to have an inherent othering nature. Basically, the dominant political ideology, or whichever is most dominant at that time, they have a huge influence over the language. And the language in itself has this othering nature where it sets this norm based on the dominant political ideology. Suppose if you're talking about gender, which is, I think, the most commonly used example to explain this. If the dominant ideology goes in the sense of a binary division, a binary choice between gender, um, yeah, then you risk having those people. Oh, there's this typo. It's supposed to be norms, but whatever. So it sets this norm, and the people who are sort of different and do not exactly fit the norm are excluded. And who excludes it, you might ask? It's the language. The language in itself exercises power, as in to sideline those people who do not fit the norm as you would want them to be. Now, the problem of with this and how it relates to our specific AI problem is that the example of these differences is very easily seen if you think between African American vernacular language, vernacular English or British English, right? If there's a data set if there's a model which has been trained, especially more on British English, but focusing on British English, and if the NLP is more likely to favor British English over AAVE in a majority of the scenarios, and AAVE has, of course, historically been spoken by people of color in American cities and that kind of stuff. All of you know that. So, and they tend to have marginalized lives. They tend to be marginalized in their everyday lives. And this marginalization includes, but it's not just limited to, a refusal to understand AAVE as another form of English, instead calling it incorrect or grammatically wrong. That is what an AI could do. If you use an autocorrect, which is powered by NLP, and which has been exclusively trained on British English, it can exclude the people who do not fit the norm, who do not fit the norm that was set by the person who trained the model. So that's not even a norm which was set by the dominant political ideology. It was set by the small team of people who are making the product, who are making the model, or who are training the model more or less. So the major distinction here between the problem that Foucault raises, Michel Foucault raises in philosophy, in political philosophy, is that here the small group of people who are sitting in that AI lab and crafting and training their software need to be diverse, really diverse, because suppose it's a team of 20 people, which is of course small, but yeah, if it's a team of 20 people, and suppose white people are being overrepresented there, or people who speak British English are being overrepresented there. They're more likely to select data sets which represent their what they think is natural for them, and they would unknowingly exclude those who do not fit the norm. Yeah, that's the theory. If you apply it to NLP, so that's also something you need to be sure about, that you're not doing that and you're being as inclusive as you can in your training of the model, right? Yeah. If we fail to account for these in our ethical analysis of NLP, we may fall into historical pitfalls which harm people of color or the minorities, basically. Those who may not necessarily have the greatest access to financial resources to even fight these, or, yeah. So that's the idea. Okay. Then we're on to the actual and popular problems within AI ethics. The problem of the black box, the Chinese room problem raised by John Searle. And yeah, I think all of this somehow relates to literature as well. That's why I put in Kafka, and I'll show the connection towards the very end, right? The basic idea of black box, as we just saw in the headline, was even the people who are making these or training these models do not exactly know uh, how it did what it did, or how it works, basically. And the best solution we have so far of knowing how an AI came up to an output from a specific input is to use what can be called a surrogate model. And I'll briefly explain what that is as well. Um, yeah, so this is the black box problem. And in simple terms, I just explained it to you. You give the model an input, it gives you an output, but you have no clue what is going inside the model. So that's a black box. Input gives you output, you don't know what is going inside. This isn't just some edge case which happens sometimes. It is what happens most of the times. You almost never know how it got to the output it did, right? And it is, of course, because large neural networks, where even the developers can't fully explain why it came out, is because they're coded of so many layers of different algorithms working together. It's incredibly difficult to figure out how a specific input converted to a specific output. The backtracking is a very uh, mathematically intensive process in this case. So it can't be actually, yeah, it's difficult to accomplish. So yeah, so even some might think, why does it even matter? If it works, it works, right? So the implication is that if you're supposed denied loan or flagged a high risk suspect or something like that, you may ask, and you deserve to know, um, why that happened. And if the response to that is just that's because what the algorithm said, you would not be satisfied. You would be deeply mad about that, right? And no one can tell you why the algorithm said it, right? That's the problem. But so a lot of people think they have and they deserve a right to an explanation in such cases. Even in the European Union, they're passing legislation on this. So yeah, this is the problem which is under great scrutiny as of now. And specific policies about it are varying from place to place. But yeah, of course, getting to the Chinese room problem or the parable. So here's how it goes. Imagine a person who doesn't know a word of Chinese, okay? And they're locked in a room and they're getting in slips of paper with Chinese characters on them, basically questions essentially. And then they have this massive rule book with them, which is written in English, which is the only language they speak. They do not speak Chinese, the person inside the room. That tells them what to respond based on what the characters they see. Suppose if you get a character that looks like this is the character you reply with. If that's the kind of rule book they're using to give answers to the questions that they get, are they actually understanding what is going on? Is a good question, right? So they look up the rules, they follow them, and they pass back the characters right through the door. To someone outside, it may look like the person within the room speaks fluent Chinese because you can't see what's going on within the room. The person inside has no idea what any of it means, right? They're just following patterns, they're just following instructions in some sense. This is what AI is today. It's just following prompts, thinking about it through specific um, ways of thinking, which have been hard coded into it through years and years of training. So yeah, that's how it is working. But perhaps it's not actually understanding what is happening, right? They just produce responses that sound fluent, insightful, even emotional, but like underneath, they don't understand a thing, right? They're just manipulating symbols and not the meaning. But if a system doesn't understand what is going on, then it can't be said to believe or intend or care about whatever is going on. And if you don't care about what is going on, if you don't have if you don't understand what is going on, basically, you shouldn't be a good judge of that. You can't be a good judge of that. You can't be a good judge whether something is true or harmful. So that leads us back into the problem whether AI should ever be used in making policy decisions. Not policy decisions, but more like enforcing stuff. Suppose flagging you as a high risk suspect. Is that something AI should actually do? Because it is filled with biases and perhaps it's not even understanding what is happening. It's just replicating what has been happening over the years. So if the trend is that uh, if the trend is that people of a certain minority tend to be flagged more, you're more likely to get flagged, even if there's no actually good reason behind that. Yeah, that's the point we were trying to raise. This is the summary of what I said, and we have systems that sound intelligent but lack understanding. They shape decisions, and because of their influence, they deserve to be tested upon. And the best we have of that is, as I said, something like a surrogate model. Now, how that works is more computer science-y than philosophy, but I'll cover that as well. So basically, you cannot it's very computationally intensive to go back through the main model and find out how it came up with the answer. You could instead have a smaller model and train it on the specific data set you require it to, and then you can ask that model to explain how the original model came up with the answer that it did. Of course, this is not exactly super accurate. But the point here is it can work in theory at least. But has been a lot of research. I read some papers which also seem to suggest that even if the original model you made was intentionally filled with biases, the the surrogate model still does a pretty good job of coming up with explanations that sound reasonable for the responses it came up with, for the responses the original model came up with. So more than a means of giving people the right to their explanation, this is more like you just explaining to them. Um, of course, my reasoning was biased, but yet you're still wrong. That just seems morally incorrect. So yeah, a lot of work needs to be done on the surrogate model idea to actually have a reasonable chance of be working, right? Yeah. And why this seems like a why the literature connection to me is that uh, this actually all of this like a black box, the unexplained decisions and the faceless authority behind all of it. Uh, starts to feel like eerily similar to something you would read in literature, especially with Kafkaesque literature. He wrote about this experience where basically you're caught in a system that decides your fate, but gives you no access to the reasoning the system had behind this decision that it made. The book is, I believe, The Trial, and Joseph K is the person who gets arrested and prosecuted without ever being told why. He gets trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare. It goes like not because of the cruelty, but because of the opacity, because you don't know what is going on. So yeah, that's how that goes in the Kafkaesque bureaucracy. And this could even be similar, uh, perhaps even worse, if you use the surrogate model to give explanations that are false, right? So yeah, that's the key ideas here. But we'll go over the rest of the problems very briefly. So, of course, there's the problem with data scraping. So, how how models get their information, which they train upon and after work on and process on, is that they scrape websites or any library really, um, for all the data they can find. And more the data, the better the model, the more accurate is the model. And that's the point. But how this data scraping thing works is highly unethical in most cases because websites tend to have files called robots.txt, which are basically instructions to any bot scraping the machine, telling it, okay, we know what you're doing. Just please don't do it. It hurts us and our creative workers or whoever made the slide, if it's a site, if it's a blog or something. It's highly unethical. Please don't do it. Please don't scrape our data. Please don't flatten it. Please don't use it in an AI model. We do not want that. That's the instruction. But it's very easy, at least right now, for AI labs to say, we just missed your instruction. We didn't see it. That's how it goes. So they do participate in unethical activities. They do scrape the data, but they just don't act like it wasn't their fault. They didn't know about it. So yeah, that's how it goes. And the worker's point is behind what we think is very elegant and self-operational autonomous AI. Uh, the way it works is that there are lots of people who are working jobs such as I think they're called click workers is the name within the gig economy. They're like underpaid click workers who label images day and night, and content moderators in, of course, the developing parts and the undeveloped parts of the world in the global south, actually, who are exposed to harmful content like their entire working day. And lots of human labor actually goes into building these, what we call autonomous machines, because they need data to train on. And to produce high quality data, the next alternative after scraping it is to get people to make it. And of course, some people you would be highly paid, highly specialized data they're creating and they're getting paid. But a lot of them is just classifying is what image is this? And is this image something right? Or is this something we should hide or in our website? Something like that, right? So it's click workers who spend a lot of time and labor for like very meager pay. And should we just ignore their demands, just like we did with the websites and its creators, just like we ignored robots.txt? Should we also ignore workers.txt, their demands? No, right? So that's also something that's there. People are thinking about it. Again, summary of what I was saying. But there's a solution to this as well. There's the concept of data owning democracies, within which the government gives you access to the data that you sort of create or is a result of you just existing. That data cannot be accessed by other companies without you perhaps selling it to them, donating it, or you do whatever you want with your own data. You just get a list of your data, a copy of it, and then you decide what happens to it. If you want to just burn it, get rid of it, yeah, that's your call. Yeah, that's and there are some more ideas as well. There's socialism in that the companies which process data, at least that division is owned by all the people since the people own the data. So there are lots of political solutions to this problem. Yeah, but I leave that to you to think about. Okay, and how do you fix this problem? Is the major thing that you could think about. So there's actually no like true way to fix these biases as they're like very much ingrained within our society and cognition. But there are steps we can use to mitigate them as much as possible, right? So like for measurement bias, especially collect your data in a standardized manner, and avoid prejudice in the model, basically. Like label it properly, no labeling errors, that kind of stuff. For representation bias, attempt to collect data that comes from a variety of perspectives instead of just the standard that we work off of today. As I said, having more people, having a diverse community, choosing the data set to train on is, of course, better. That's also called, I think, wisdom of the crowd, which is the concept. If there's a more diverse community, you get output, basically. Better output, basically. Yeah, more insightful output. And for the historical bias, finally, when determining what data you're going to collect and to represent a group of people, try filtering your data as much as possible so factors such as race and gender are not present or unimportant in your analysis. Right. Okay, so yeah, ethics in NLP has had like a long and complicated history behind it that is often difficult for people to comprehend. But if we make like an attempt, like a good attempt to avoid these dilemmas and acknowledge the issues that come up within NLP, then it can shine like even brighter than ever before. Yeah, we'll have more ethical AI. Yeah, we'll all just feel good about that, as I guess. Yep. Again, summary of what I said. Can't be eliminated, can only be addressed, right? That kind of stuff. But I was discussing this with a friend of mine yesterday, and I came up like there's this very nice view, I would say. It's a very different view than what most people would hold, I think. But maybe there isn't really a good fix. Even the ones I suggested are perhaps not that good. And why would you think that? So idea goes like um, all efforts to fix bias may inherently be motivated by another acknowledged bias. Unacknowledged bias. That's a bias you aren't aware of. So if you're trying to address current biases, uh, that thought process in your brain is also powered by another unacknowledged bias in a certain sense. So it's like a doxa replacing another doxa, if you get what I'm trying to say. Yeah, this is not that important. This is just something I thought was pretty interesting, so I just included it. I'll just quickly go over it, and you can think about it on your own if you'd like. So, trying to define or solve a bias risks becoming like a performative paradox, is what it's called, which is like, I think it's Wittgenstein's last loop or last game, whatever people call it. Yeah, so the main idea is, other than the fancy words, the main idea is the reform or the idea of reform is itself a part of the system it is trying to critique. So you try to raise voice against the system, but you and the idea itself are a part of the system, right? That's a good way to put it,
Mm,
I think. Yeah. Even ethical improvements operate within like an ideological framework. New biases might still like recategorize people in ways that old hierarchies mirror, right? So instead of erasing bias, perhaps the goal is like to make maybe the goal is to make the bias less visible, negotiate and clearer, or perhaps like a better way to put it is to replace the bias consciously instead of like unconsciously replicating it. So to a lesser bias, perhaps. Yeah, I think that's a way to put it. And there's also another view to this, a postmodern view, which could also call to it that maybe the idea of a neutral bias isn't really practical. Maybe that's not just a real thing, right? Yeah, that's also something you can think about. So yeah, again, ethics isn't being unbiased; it's being transparent about the bias you choose. So now you're choosing a bias. So this is also a decision which the person who's training or their model has to make. So there are lots of ethical decisions or philosophical decisions which the person who is like developing this has to answer, which is why this entire thing exists, which is why AI ethics exists. Yeah, you can't just go on building stuff without like addressing the ethical aspects of it. This is the last topic of what we're addressing, and we'll just go in it a little deeper because I think it is a bit of a complex topic as compared to the others. Like black box theory and that kind of stuff is pretty common, and so is the Chinese room parable. But this is something that I think is pretty original. Applying this here, this is something I did like a recent paper of mine. I just wanted to cover that idea because really thinking about this a lot. Yeah, okay. So there's this concept of epistemic. Okay, so we'll go over like the beginning of this so you understand the context, and then we'll apply it all to AI. So in the beginning, this might feel a little distant from what we were talking about till now, right? Okay. So epistemic authority is a concept. which basically, okay, there's a summary page as well. Yeah. So if you wanted to summarize it very neatly, epistemic authority is sort of directly proportional to influence. But a good way to put it is that traditionally speaking, the people who were deemed intellectually virtuous, sort of the gurus, if you know about some Eastern thought, were in positions of epistemic authority. What were considered positions of epistemic authority? Suppose there's this guru who's trying to tell his students or shishyas, or that's those are the fancy words about stuff. Yeah, that's a way of knowing. And there's this Sanskrit word, that phrase is shabda pramana, which basically means uh okay, it basically means knowledge from uh I'm not sure of a good way to translate it, but what it means basically is there are different ways of knowings. Most accepted is that there are six ways, like sight and that kind of stuff. And Shabda Pramana is something you get from a guru. If a guru tells you some knowledge, that is just taken as an actual source of knowledge in itself, and that it is enough. That's what it is considered like. Yeah, so that's what it means. So epistemic authority. Suppose there's this guru who has authority, and in older times, it used to be that the person who was in a position of epistemic authority had influence, and mostly other people did not. So if you were someone who isn't as knowledgeable about the subject you're talking about, or perhaps not even intellectually virtuous, and what it means to be intellectually virtuous is to have the skills which enable you to be a good learner and a good thinker. That is very vague for if I'm like describing it right now, but what it basically means to have epistemic humility and be apt, adroit, and accurate in the way you seek knowledge. Like, yeah, those are the words behind that, right? Uh, so the point is, in older times, people who were not in a position, who were not intellectually virtuous, nor were they like very knowledgeable about the field, if they spoke something, if they shared their opinion about a subject matter, people would tend to ignore them, right? But right now, the point is that if because now anyone can go viral, right? So if you send out a tweet, if you make a reel or a video or whatever, you have the tools to get just as much reach as the people in older times with great epistemic authority did. So in a certain sense, you do have that epistemic authority now, or you have a chance of having it. If you make a video, it goes viral, then you have the epistemic authority, not otherwise, right? Yeah. So you have a shot at being like the epistemic authority in a certain subject. You have a shot at being considered very like diligently and being read very wisely. A good example of this is okay. So yeah, the problem is, so if you said something, if a guru said something, if they provided some knowledge, and the person who understood it in their own way, sort of different from what the guru was trying to say. But of course, a part of language, because the audience meaning and the speaker meaning don't always match in the context of language. So what the student understood was sort of different from what the guru was actually trying to say, what the teacher was actually trying to say. And they act on their knowledge, but their understanding of the knowledge. And they cause some great harm to society or someone. Who is responsible for that harm? Is it the person who acted, or is it also the person who was in the position of authority? So yeah, that's the question. And a good implication to put it like that is the example of Darwin and Hitler, which we'll like very quickly go over. So Darwin came up with a theory of evolution, right? Not exactly Darwin and Herbert Spencer perhaps came up with a theory of evolution. That would be more correct to put it. But he was a great role in framing the theory. And he also came up with an idea of hierarchy amongst races, which he didn't like totally explain what he exactly meant by that. And Hitler, of all people, had an interpretation of what Darwin was trying to say. Perhaps he wasn't influenced by Darwin, but he was using Darwin as a way to justify what he did. And the problem is that Darwin wrote pretty vaguely. So it was easy for Hitler to justify what he was trying to justify. So perhaps since Darwin was in a position of epistemic authority, he knew that he should be more careful since he'll be widely read with what he writes. He should be more discreet and clear with and thorough with what he's writing. But he didn't do that. So somewhat at fault, there's Darwin as well. Darwin is morally culpable as well with what happened, is what I would say, what this theory would tell us. So, in the context of AI or in right now, social media, anyone can go viral, really, right? So, if you say something, and the people right now who have the potential to go viral or go be very well listened to or read, perhaps they don't even possess the intellectual virtues that we're talking about in this case. Maybe they aren't even an expert in their field. Maybe they're just saying something which is incredibly biased in its opinion, and perhaps it's just trying to please a small community, or maybe the goal of all of it is to radicalize the people, um, to make just anger them, right? If that's the intention with which they're speaking, and they go, let's say, viral, and some actions start after that. Suppose a riot starts. Who is responsible for that? Of course, the person in this case, right? To some extent, and to some extent, if the people as well, if they were not really clear with what the speaker said, right? Uh, but so yeah, this the case. You will share the moral culpability or moral responsibility within the speaker and the people who did the action, of course. So depending on how much at fault either of them were. But with AI, if you have AI generated videos, if you are a person who just wants to go viral, get the views, since that is sort of promoted by these social media platforms, and you use an algorithm, you use AI to make videos which sort of just radicalize the people, and you're not you don't even know about that. You're pretty much totally unaware of what is going on. You use AI to share, make a video, create it, put it out there, and the video shares something which is deeply misguided, and total misinformation, that also causes some riots, for example. Who is at fault then? Is it the person who trained the AI, trained the model? Is it the person who just used it? Or is it the person, or is it the person who acted on it, right? I think here as well, there's a lot to think about, and I can't like, actually give all the answers to all the questions, at least my answers in this much time. But if you think about it, the person who trained the AI is sort of at fault as well, since they trained it on data, which is misinformed in some sense of the word, and perhaps even biased. They could have taken more care into having, of course, like we said, a diverse community, a diverse committee which looks after creating that AI and that sort of stuff. So yeah, the sharing responsibility when in such cases where the ethical, like the epistemic part of it, the epistemic authority is there with the AI. Who shares the epistemic responsibility is the question. Yeah, again, same thing. One more interpretation is that AI generated content has a tone of epistemic authority, but has no consciousness, no conscience, or no clarity on impact, and no clarity on impact. So, for the model in itself is probably not culpable and not responsible. It's the people behind it to a certain extent. But perhaps with AGI, this could change as well. We could consider the model to be culpable as well. Yeah, epistemic zombies is just one word, fancy word to say no consciousness or no understanding of what is going on, but just spreading information out there. And a thing for you all to think about it is, can we actually teach LLMs intellectual virtues, right? If we can do that, then perhaps we can also like, since we can train them on data now, we can train them to recognize, okay, this is something that is a cat, this is not a cat, stuff like that. Can you also teach it to, through lots of training, that perhaps this is the right behavior, this is not, this is an intellectually virtuous behavior, this is not, that kind of stuff. Until then, a good part of the solution that I would suggest just involves strict social media policies against AI content, perhaps recommending that to less people, reviewing it more strictly, till the AI ethics people catch up. And yeah, that's the lecture. Just for summary, what I was thinking was just like going over the headlines in this, but we already did that. We have some resources as well. One of my favorite books, I have it like right here, lying somewhere around my table. Uh, yeah, no, maybe not now, but the book is, yeah, I think it's here. Yep, I have this one of my favorite books, really. My camera is also on, I think. So yeah, neuroscience, language, and philosophy. So neuroscience and philosophy, brain, mind, and language. I misspelled it, but by Daniel Dennett, and also John Soule, the guy who came up with the Chinese room thing. So yeah, it's a good book to get introduced to the subject. There's also The Precipice by Toby Ord. You can also get a free copy of it. I have a link. I'll send a link so you can like just get a free copy delivered to your place. Um, I did a competition and then sent me a link to order a bunch of free copies. So I'll send that on the group. And yeah, there's a video by Philosophy Tube as well. I'll share this whole thing. So you can maybe I missed out on some stuff which the video covers in great depth. I love the video. And yeah, if you want to like engage more in philosophy, sort of co-founded an organization, Philosium, which sort of helps with this entire thing, like making people more ethically aware, of course, and engaging them in philosophical discussions. And we do have a lot of STEM people as well. So it's not just people you might think do the humanities who have nothing else to do and are sitting idle and discussing. We do have a bunch of people from the physics Olympiads and stuff, and people who actually know their subject, and people who are really interested in philosophy of science, philosophy of AI alignment, that kind of stuff. And Plato is also an organization you have lots of resources to learn philosophy. And yeah, I also work with Plato as well. Yep, that's what we have. Those are the slides. And I know it's pretty late. Like I ran like over the time, but if there are any questions, I'm still here for a bit. And if you do not have any questions, you are free to leave. But yeah, if you have any questions, please go ahead. You can also unmute, I think. I'm pretty open to any question right now. Also, if not, all the best. You guys have like another, I don't know how many hours are left till the submission deadline, but yeah. Uh, so yeah, you could work on your presentations now and be sure to submit them at noon CST. Yeah, in 12 hours. Perfect. Last 12 hours, make sure to work on whatever you're doing. And if you're doing something, of course, in the social good category, uh, perhaps try and ensure, if you're training a model, try and ensure that uh, you cover stuff which is you sort of cover all your grounds and your model is not that biased, right? All right. Thank you, guys. And yeah, feel free to submit the workshop feedback form. I'll send that out on the group right now, and also the slides in the recording, all of it. Cool. Thank you. I'll stop recording if there are no questions. Okay.